People are unpredictable, but no matter what, you can bet that anything and everything they do has some sort of purpose. When I eat a cookie, it's because I want to feel good. I take a walk since I need to exercise my legs. Expressing myself is enjoyable, so I draw. And when I wash my dishes, it's so I have plates for next time. Every action requires a corresponding motivation, of which there are two types. First are intrinsic motivations. I feel motivated to do these things because they directly result in my happiness. I listen to music because it feels good. The other type is extrinsic motivation. These activities are motivated as a means to an enjoyable end. Maybe they're not so fun, but it serves as a staircase to what I think will actually promise happiness. And there's often many motivations for a single action. For example, in school we take courses. Hopefully we find some of these intrinsically fun, but we do others so we can get a nice grade or whatever. Eventually, most of us are extrinsically seeking the academic success that promises us happiness. If you're a creator, motivation is the heartbeat of your work. A teacher or writer that loses their audience's interest loses their focus as well. If a player loses interest, your game is left to just collect dust. Today, we're going to explore how developers motivate their audiences to participate in gameplay. When should we use extrinsic reward? Intrinsic reward? How much? Is there such a thing as too much? What are the motivations of different people, and how can we account for them? These terms are at their core very simple, but they open up to a world of nuance and complexity. So, which one's better, intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? Put your guess in the comments below. If you guessed intrinsic, you are completely right. Great job! Give yourself a big pat on the back. Extrinsic motivation alone is often never enough to make us do stuff. Even if that extrinsic motivation is massive, like working towards your career, we'll often ignore it for those activities that grant us intrinsic and immediate joy. You can usually tell if something's extrinsically motivated if you're trying to get through with it as fast as you can. For example, when I walk outside in the burbs for exercise, I listen to Maddigan conspiracy videos for added intrinsic motivation. It's just too boring otherwise. So, in terms of gameplay loops, players will feel more engaged if the game is fun in and of themselves. Shocker, I know. You don't play games to get some skins or to bump up your hours, you do it cause it's fun. And actually, additional extrinsic rewards can rot away the fulfillment of existing intrinsic engagement. Like, you know when you're gonna wash the dishes or whatever and then your parents say, "Hey Morgan, wash the dishes!" Well, now you don't want to do it anymore. When you get into it, math, science, and writing, all those other school subjects are actually a lot of fun. Unfortunately, school systems with all their extrinsic mandating and marks and all their "your future depends on it" just takes it all away. It's not fun anymore. This is what I call extrinsic devaluation. A more relevant example, and a now famous analysis done by the developers of Don't Starve, you can find them in the description, they found that adding tasks and achievement to their games take away from the incentive to play the game itself. Don't Starve is a survival game about intense time and resource management. It tries to suspend a tone of mystery, so it doesn't really want to explicitly explain anything. Of course, that means players had no idea what to do. To reconcile this, they added quests to give direction. Make a science machine or chop 10 trees. But rather than play for the game, players started playing for the tasks, and when the tasks were exhausted, players had and felt no reason to continue.
I don't want to play Don't Starve. This game is so boring.
Just like the dishwashing scenario, being given extrinsic goals only succeeded in degrading the actual fun. They found it less interesting and tried to rush through it. Honestly, extrinsic devaluation doing this is kinda scary. Like, if you want to just make your kid hate drawing, all you gotta do is give them classes and make them learn drawing principles before they made up their mind about it. You may find more success in letting your gameplay speak for itself. However, that isn't to say that extrinsic reward is, useless. You need it sometimes. For one thing, intrinsic reward just takes a while to manifest. In Don't Starve, gameplay is centered around incredibly strict time and resource management. But it takes maybe an hour before gameplay is just walking around randomly eating berries you find off the ground. It's just impossible to keep up intrinsic motivation throughout. And when games can't, extrinsic purpose is the only thing keeping someone going. If you make games and you're here, I think you'll agree that game development in its totality is extremely engaging and fulfilling. I find it a difficult, diverse, varied, and non-stop challenge. Game development is a combination of many things. I especially enjoy systems programming, game design, and animation. However, there are parts I don't like so much. Storytelling, 3D modeling, and menu design are all extremely boring to me. I don't find them fun, but there's nothing wrong with them, except for menu design. Center div here, buttons there, navigate to another menu over there, 2 pixel margin, blah blah blah, like whatever, man. When I'm doing this stuff, I have to remind myself that it's all going towards the game, so I gotta do it. Unlike programming, I wouldn't be doing it otherwise. External, extrinsic goals are needed when intrinsic reward is missing. Also, what people find intrinsically motivating can be pretty niche and subjective. My favorite games have fast-paced combat and aerial movement, but I dislike methodical platformers, which are pretty similar. Give Celeste a sword to kill people though, and that's my jam. Internal, intrinsic goals are naturally subjective. What's nice about extrinsic reward is that it's usually more universal. Everyone can relish in the idea of completing a goal, winning stuff, fulfilling curiosity, or overcoming difficulty. This is especially true for new players. The beginning of a game's gameplay is a far, far cry from the peak near the middle and end. This blue line here represents intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic reward can be an excellent breadcrumb trail to keep the player playing, the intended way before things get good. Make them excited near the start and then eventually level it off to make room for intrinsic motivation. Here are a couple of examples. Valorant is a pretty complicated stealthy team game. Naturally, the game has extrinsic lures in its competition, and its ranking system offers both a goal and evens the complexity for new players. God of War has a stunning first level, it's terrifically beautiful and cinematic, and the fight with the stranger is a spectacle, even though you're just spamming X. It's a very successful hook, in gameplay and narrative, for new players. Journey is likewise very beautiful, but also has this massive mountain that serves as a beacon of progress. This mountain getting closer and closer helps a lot in a game you have to complete in a single session. Aight, so these ideas are great and all, but I think we can all agree that this topic is really abstract. Sure, you've told me the terms and I know what extrinsic motivation does, but those initial questions are only kind of answered. So, rather than a few sparse examples, let's go through a case study to understand this better. 5 years ago, I bought a very small, unknown indie gem named Hollow Knight. The game begins with an ominous cutscene, a mysterious monster, and a cryptic poem. Of course, at this point, there was no intrinsic gameplay motivation. There was no Nightmare Kingdom, no sprawling and puzzling kingdom, and no Zote. I treaded through King's Pass and dropped into the first area, the Forgotten Crossroads. Hollow Knight's actual gameplay will not do anything interesting for 2 hours. The gameplay is just walking around and defeating very simple enemies, yet it mysticized me with its art and its music. But more than anything, Hollow Knight maintains a carefully articulated sense of curiosity. Even in this first area, which is extremely linear, the game hides many breakable walls and secret upgrades to discover. This is how Team Cherry breadcrumbs their players through the very boring early part of the game. Curiosity that promises a world. Inaccessible areas, jumps that are just barely too high. Enemies blocking paths we can't defeat yet. While many recent Metroidvanias explode open right away, I think Hollow Knight's opening benefits upon a profound sense of mystery, as I walked a small thread in a plausibly gigantic kingdom. Beyond discovering the world, Crossroads sets up many smaller goals for the player. Marked in the Crossroads center is a giant monster's face. Similarly to Journey's Mountain, I found this enough to keep me going for a few. Like Don't Starve, Hollow Knight is trying to maintain a mysterious tone. But rather than trying overt quests, Hollow Knight offers implicit direction through stuff like this. By making these goals implicit parts of the environment, I felt a greater satisfaction of setting these goals myself. I'm in control. This is what we call design language, kids. Things that tell you stuff without speaking. Of course, making things implicit is a gamble. It doesn't work for everyone. I watched maybe 7 of my friends play this game, and rather than curious to explore, some people were just completely overwhelmed by navigation and couldn't anchor on obscure goals. Some people were just so bored by the dull combat they just up and left. Because the Forgotten Crossroads is almost completely linear, there's little room for players to go somewhere easier or harder. I think most people would agree that the beginning of Hollow Knight is perhaps one of its weakest parts. While shows or games are passive activities, games demand active decision and input from its players. When I was watching Markiplier play FNAF in 2019, all I had to do was shut down my brain and watch the funny man talk on screen. However, playing Hollow Knight, I had to actually move my fingers and do combat and make decisions on where I was going to go. Whenever we engage in something, we have a finite amount of patience. Because games require so much more mental effort, this patience drains fast. If games fail to maintain interest, players will just quit. The tolerance for games is much lower than any other media. Nevertheless, I trudged on, attained the Vengeful Fury, and vanquished the Elder Barber. This is where the game delivers Greenpath, which is just absolutely stunning. Hollow Knight had been musty blues and blacks for 2 hours, and this verdant area is literally the sole reason I continued playing. Gameplay-wise, though, nothing much changes. You zigzag linearly through Greenpath while Hornet drags you on like a carrot on a stick, which is this area's implicit intrinsic goal. Just when I had been getting tired of getting over it in the tall screens and spamming X, the game finally hits me with Hornet. Hornet was devastatingly difficult, maybe took me 20 tries, but she was also completely fair. This is another gamble by Team Cherry that paid off for me. After Hornet, I had a newfound respect for the depths of Hollow Knight's combat that once seemed so simple. What media does early on is incredibly important. Other than setting the tone and being the main moments where people stay or leave, everything you do is a promise to the audience. It sets a precedent. When games start off with a super fast combat section, you will expect it to continue surprising you with that same nuance. When a book starts eye-opening plot threads, we expect a conclusion that will drop our jaws. When the media fails to deliver on these expectations, it's more disappointing than anything else. I'm sure you're all familiar, it's often the product of media leaning on extrinsic engagement without actually planning what makes it intrinsically interesting. The intrinsic reward of the media must match the extrinsic goals and promises. What I'm saying is that if you use extrinsic purpose, the matching intrinsic delivery better be based. So far, Hollow Knight has been careful. It knows story isn't its focus, so it doesn't try to pretend it has a billion plot threads. It knows it's a quiet game, so it starts off very peacefully, other than, bombastically. What it has promised to me is an expansive world, and the precedent of gnarly boss fights. I can probably name a couple of games where it starts off too strong, or it shows you a big mountain, and when you get there it's like 3 polygons. Thankfully though, Hollow Knight completely delivers. After you get the Mantis Claw and enter the City of Tears, the game's boundaries just completely explode. What were once promises of a world became a real place as I found myself manically exploring, noting, and charting the environment. The game broke up its pacing with extremely unique and challenging bosses, and just when I got too comfortable, it would introduce to me new areas and upgrades to play with. For the rest of Hollow Knight's runtime, I was having real, intrinsic fun. The only time I can remember being really disappointed was Nosk. Like, so much setup for the worst boss fight in the game. Now, of course, the fun can't last forever. Hollow Knight doesn't want its players to leave with a sour taste, so it gives the goal of an end. In the center of the world, where everyone will inevitably end up, the game marks the location of 3 dreamers needed to unlock the final boss in the end credits. It's just a light enough extrinsic motivation to feel like I'm in control, but also noticeably more significant to give it focus. But, even after I beat the game, I still had gas in the tank. Luckily, Hollow Knight was prepared with a true ending for weirdos like me. After that though, I really was done. Hollow Knight has a lot of extra content, but by placing a clear end, it let me leave before the butter got spread too thin. My interest meter drained and I stopped playing, but in that really nice, satisfied kind of way. That's a rare feeling. It's conclusion time! First off, your goal is to make your game intrinsically engaging. Always try to let players form their own goals, but use extrinsic motivation to guide them through rough patches. Recognize that whenever a player is extrinsically motivated to do something, they expect intrinsic delivery as well. The cards you show are also a promise, so don't play your whole hand right away. So, yeah,